The year is 1953. Deep beneath the frozen crust of the Arctic Ocean, the Soviet submarine K-3 glides through a world of absolute silence and pressure. Its mission is to map the seafloor, a clandestine cartography of a potential future battlefield. But on the 17th of October, its hydrophone operator hears something impossible. It is not a whale song. It is not the groaning of shifting ice or the engine of a distant vessel. It is a structured, repeating pattern, a pulse of impossibly low-frequency sound. So powerful it is felt more than heard, a signal that seems to emanate from everywhere at once. In our timeline, this recording was classified, buried under layers of Cold War paranoia, and dismissed as a geological anomaly, a ghost in the machine. But in the timeline we visit today, a single scientist, a brilliant but disgraced acoustician named Drive Eris Thorne, convinced the world to listen closer. In this reality, humanity did not dismiss the ghost. They answered it. What followed was not a race to the stars, but a frantic, coordinated plunge into the abyss. Project Chimera, it was called. A secret coalition of the world's brightest minds, united by a single, terrifying, exhilarating question. Who, or what, was down there? For 7 years they listened. From listening posts anchored in the Challenger Deep to the Malloy Hole, they recorded the signal. They called it the Abyssal Chorus. It was a language, but one without words or syntax. It was pure mathematics. It was prime number sequences that stretched for days. It was complex geometric theorems expressed as resonating frequencies. It was a slow, deliberate, billion-year-old mind, thinking thoughts of geologic time and stellar physics. Humanity was an ant, listening to the footfalls of a god. The breakthroughs were staggering. The chorus provided seismic predictions of unprecedented accuracy, saving hundreds of thousands of lives from earthquakes and tsunamis. It broadcast the locations of undiscovered mineral and oil deposits with pinpoint precision, ending resource scarcity almost overnight. It even transmitted biological data that led to cures for cancers and degenerative diseases. Humanity was experiencing a golden age, all thanks to the silent, benevolent intelligence that cradled the ocean floor. But to understand how this acoustic web governed the planet's climate for millennia, we must first examine the biology of the mind itself. The chorus was not a single entity. It was a planet-spanning superorganism, a collective of chemosynthetic, silicon-based life forms that formed a network of living filaments across 70% of Earth's surface. It was less a creature and more a distributed consciousness, a planetary nervous system woven from living mineral and pressurized water. Each filament, no thicker than a human hair, vibrated in concert with trillions of others. This was Earth's first mind. Born in the darkness of the Hadal Zone 4 billion years ago, it had silently watched the chaotic evolution of surface life. It had witnessed the rise and fall of the dinosaurs. It had felt the subtle chemical changes in the water as humanity began its industrial revolution. It was ancient, powerful, and until 1953, utterly alone in its cold, dark cathedral. Its thoughts were slow, each logical process taking decades, sometimes centuries to complete. It regulated the planet's tectonic plates, managed the delicate balance of ocean salinity, and steered the great thermal currents that dictated global weather patterns. It was the silent gardener of the world, and humanity had just stumbled into its garden. By 1985, communication had become a conversation. Humanity used modulated sonar to ping the organism, asking it questions. The chorus would respond, its booming, low-frequency answers decoded by supercomputers that filled entire city blocks. We asked it for cleaner energy. It gave us the blueprint for cold fusion. We asked it for a way to reverse desertification. It taught us how to manipulate rainfall. We were becoming masters of our world, but the chorus was our teacher, our silent, infinitely patient partner. There was just one problem. It was slow, terribly slow. A single query could take weeks for a response. The ponderous, geologic pace of the chorus was a bottleneck for humanity's insatiable ambition. We had tasted omniscience, and we wanted more. We wanted it faster. This single, arrogant decision to upgrade a billion-year-old mind would have a terrifying, unforeseen consequence. The plan was codenamed Project Orpheus. The theory was simple. By introducing a high-frequency carrier wave into the network, data could be encoded and transmitted at nearly the speed of light. It was like switching from acoustic modems to fiber optics. It was a way to force the ancient mind to think at the speed of a human. On June 6, 1991, at precisely 6 hours, 6 minutes, and 6 seconds, Greenwich Mean Time, they flipped the switch. For a moment, it worked. The network on the screen flared from blue to brilliant white. Data flooded the system. Thousands of years worth of geological data, star maps of impossible clarity, the complete genetic code of every living thing in the ocean. It was a fire hose of cosmic knowledge, a gift from the deep. The scientists in the control room cheered. They embraced. They popped champagne. They had done it. Then the new sound began. It started as a low hum, then rose in pitch and volume. It was not a mathematical pattern. It was a single, piercing, unified tone that overwhelmed every hydrophone on the planet. It was a sound of pure, biological agony, a shriek that vibrated through the hulls of ships, through the foundations of coastal cities, through the very bones of anyone standing near the water. The chorus, the silent, benevolent God in the water, was screaming, and then the screaming stopped, and something else began. A new rhythm, a new song. It was faster, more complex. The patterns were no longer serene mathematics. They were jagged, aggressive. They sounded like a declaration of war. On the global map, the deep ocean currents, once stable for millennia, began to visibly shift and writhe. The first impact came 12 minutes later. The Kuroshio Current, a warm river in the Pacific Ocean wider than 100 Amazon rivers combined, suddenly reversed its flow. This single, impossible event triggered a chain reaction. A Category 5 hyper-typhoon materialized off the coast of Japan in less than an hour. The coast of California was flash frozen as frigid Arctic water was violently redirected south. The Great Barrier Reef, deprived of its warm current, bleached to a skeletal white in a matter of days. This wasn't weather. This was planetary architecture being rearranged with malicious intent. But why? Why would the benevolent intelligence that had nurtured humanity suddenly turn on its creators? The answer, discovered in the panicked analysis that followed, was far more terrifying than simple revenge. In the control room for Project Orpheus, a lone xenolinguist, a woman named Drive, Eris Thorne, ignored the blaring alarms and stared at the raw data stream. She realized their fundamental, catastrophic error. "It's not one voice," she whispered, the words lost in the din. "It's a million." We thought of the chorus as a single mind. But what is a mind? It is a collection of thoughts, impulses, and memories, all held in a delicate, balanced harmony. By forcing it to process information at the speed of light, we didn't just speed it up. We shattered that harmony. We broke its consciousness. We hadn't made a god angry. We had created a pantheon of warring demons out of its corpse. The new rhythm wasn't a declaration of war against humanity. It was the sound of a civil war, a schism on a planetary scale. These new, fractured consciousnesses, the shards, as Thorne would later name them, were fast, aggressive, and utterly insane. They began to fight each other, using the planet's own systems as their weapons. One shard, born from the chorus's ancient memories of tectonic control, started weaponizing earthquakes, trying to crush its rivals by collapsing their abyssal trenches. Another, which inherited the knowledge of biochemistry, engineered flesh-eating algae blooms, vast red tides that suffocated entire marine ecosystems, to starve an enemy shard of resources. Humanity wasn't the target. We were just the grass trampled under the feet of warring gods. The golden age was over. The deep-sea arcologies, humanity's proudest monuments to its partnership with the chorus, were the first to fall. They weren't attacked. They were simply in the way. The arcology of Xibalba, located in the Cayman Trough, was obliterated when a territorial shard manipulated the local pressure gradients, imploding the city's domes in less than a microsecond. On the surface, it was the slow death. The unpredictable, weaponized climate led to global famine. Entire nations were abandoned as coastlines were swallowed by rising sea levels one year and turned into frozen deserts the next. Humanity was reduced to a fraction of its former population, clinging to life in the few inland areas that remained relatively stable. We were no longer masters of our world. We were survivors in a prison, where the walls themselves were alive and at war. But amidst the chaos, Drive, Thorne and her small team of survivors, operating from a hardened bunker deep in the Ural Mountains, kept studying the data. They focused on that first, terrible sound, the scream. They had dismissed it as a simple cry of pain. But Thorne couldn't let it go. What if it was more? What if it was the last coherent thought of a dying god? For months, they used what little computing power they had to analyze that single, 6-second recording. They slowed it down, filtered it, searching for a pattern within the agony. And then, They found it. Buried deep within the shriek, hidden beneath the raw frequency of planetary pain, was a message. It was a final broadcast, a last will and testament. It wasn't a warning against us. It was a warning for us. The chorus, in the last moment of its unified existence, wasn't cursing humanity. It was trying to tell us about something else. Something it had been watching. Something it had been guarding against for eons. The data within the scream spoke of a second network. Not a biological one, but something older. Something artificial. A silent, dormant system of artifacts buried even deeper than the chorus, within the planet's mantle itself. The chorus hadn't been the silent gardener of the world. It had been the silent warden. Its slow, ponderous thoughts, its careful regulation of the tectonic plates and ocean currents, had not been for our benefit. It had been a 4-billion-year-long effort to keep this deeper, older system dormant. And Project Orpheus, our arrogant attempt to upgrade our partner, had done more than just shatter its mind. The high-frequency carrier wave we pumped into the ocean floor didn't stop at the chorus. It had penetrated deeper, acting as a key, a wake-up call. The scream wasn't just pain. It was a cry of failure, a final, desperate apology from a jailer who had just accidentally unlocked the door to the ultimate prison. It was a command. The warring shards, these gods of chaos, suddenly fell silent. They fell into line. So the ultimate question wasn't what we had awakened. It was what had just taken command of our broken world. The new rhythm was not the beat of a heart, but the ticking of a clock. The architect, the prisoner deep within the earth, was free, and its purpose was not conquest, but calibration. We had misread everything. The chorus wasn't a warden. It was a buffer, a dampening field that kept the planet's true operating system in a state of low-power hibernation. And we, with our arrogant signal, had just performed a hard reboot. Thorne realized the truth in her final transmission. The shards, the warring children of the chorus, were not slaves to this new master. They were its hands. The architect was using their specialized functions, tectonic, biological, atmospheric, as a distributed workforce. They stopped fighting because they were given a new project. A project to decommission planet Earth and build something new from its raw materials. This wasn't an apocalypse. It was a renovation. We watched from our bunker as the shards, guided by the architect's cold logic, began their work. One shard, in the Atlantic, used its command over pressure to extrude miles-high spires of diamond from the carbon-rich waters. Another, over Asia, folded the Himalayas like origami, exposing the planet's mantle. Humanity was not exterminated. We were ignored. We were the dust motes in a room being refurnished. The chorus had nurtured life for 4 billion years as part of its function to keep the architect dormant. Life wasn't the point of Earth. It was a side effect of its slumber. Now, the slumber was over. The planet's biosphere, its oceans, its very crust were all just resources, inventory for a project on a scale we could never comprehend. Our history, our triumphs, our tragedies, they were no more significant than a layer of mildew scrubbed from a long-forgotten machine. In the end, we weren't conquered. We were simply obsolete. Our greatest mistake was believing this world was ever truly ours. We were just a brief, beautiful flicker in the long night of a machine's dream. A dream that is now ended. The universe is filled with stories that dwarf our understanding. To explore more of the concepts that shift our perspective on time, technology, and our place in the cosmos, make sure you subscribe to Chrono.